Omagyanatminandasya gyananjana shalakaya chakshormilitanyena tasmai shri guruve namaha. Dandavat pranams to all the assembled Vaishnavas. So we are having our Friday Bhagavad-GÍTA meeting. And we are in the third chapter. We've come to verse 27, which is quite an important verse of Bhagavad-GÍTA. So let's hear the audio, maybe like the next 10 verses or so we can hear and then discuss.
न बुद्धिभेदं जनयेत् अज्ञानं कर्मसङ्गिनां योजयेत् सर्वकर्माणि विद्वान् युक्तः समाचरन् प्रकृतिः क्रियमाणानि गुणैः कर्माणि सर्वशः अहङ्कार विमूढात्मा कर्ताहमिति मन्यते तत्त्ववित्तु महाबाहो गुणकर्म विभागयो गुणागुणेषु वर्तन्त इति मत्वा न सज्जते प्रकृतिर्गुणसङ्गमूढः सज्जन्ते गुणकर्मसु तान् कृष्णविदो मन्दान् कृष्णविद् विचालयेत् मयि सर्वाणि कर्माणि संगनस्याध्यात्मचेतसा निराशीर्निर्ममो भूत्वा युद्धस्य विगतज्वरः ये मे मतमिदं नित्यम् अनुतिष्ठन्ति मानवाः श्रद्धावन्तो न सूयन्तो मुच्यन्ते तेऽपि कर्मभिः ये तद्सूयन्तो नानुतिष्ठन्ति मे मतम् सर्वज्ञानविमूढांस्तान् विद्धि नष्टान् अचेतसः सदृशं चेष्टते सस्या प्रकृतिर्ज्ञानवानपि प्रकृति जानती भूतानि निग्रह किं करिष्यति इंद्रिय सेन्द्रिय सार्थे रागद्वेषौ अवस्थितौ तयोर्न वशमागच्छेत् तौ झस्य परिपन्थिनौ श्रेयान् सधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् सनुष्ठितात् सधर्मे निधनं श्रेयः परधर्मो भयावहः.
Okay, good call. I was going to suggest stopping there. Perfect. Okay. And welcome Sadhvi, who also joined us. So we've come to this verse. This is quite an important verse. This is a central idea to karma yoga, right? Because it was in the previous chapter, right? There's that famous verse of karma yoga, I think in the middle to end of the second chapter, karmendriya. How does it go? Shreya, you probably know this. We don't have Suvasini with us. I think she has another meeting today. What is it? Karmanyeva, that's it. Karmanyeva adhikadaste, this famous verse. Karmanyeva adhikadaste. Yeah, you know that one, yeah. Ma phaleshu karachana, ma karma phul hetobor, ma te sangos, karmani, right? This central verse of karma yoga, and you could say Bhagavad Gita as a whole, that we have a right to do our duty, but we don't have a right to the results of our actions, right? So we must do our duty without any expectation of having possession over the results of our actions. And we're also warned we shouldn't be tempted to give up our duty because we're not getting anything out of it for ourselves, right? And so this is important verse of Karma Yoga. And then this verse, 27 in chapter 3, we just come to, this is explaining some of the logic behind this. That because someone can say like, well, it's perfectly reasonable if I did something, it only makes sense that the result belongs to me. I worked hard at this job. I I built this business up. The money belongs to me. I did this and this. I cooked this. It belongs to me. That's very logical, right? So this verse is debunking that. This verse is debunking that idea, right? Saying that actually we're not able to do anything. We're not able to do anything. We can only will, right? So, and we had a nice whiteboard session the other day here in SoCal about the nature of the soul and the coverings over the soul. So what can the soul actually do, right? We hear the soul is composed of these elements of Sat, Chit, Ananda, right? Eternity, consciousness, bliss. And then what are like the faculties of the soul? What are the activities of the soul? What can the soul actually do independently? So what are those? We hear of three things: thinking, willing, and feeling, right? Willing, thinking, feeling. These are also related to Sat, Chit, Ananda, right? So we can will, that means desire, right? We can will for something to happen. We can will to do something, but independently we cannot do it. We cannot. Whether or not we can accomplish any action depends on many outside forces. It depends on the cooperation of many outside forces, right? There's others in the environment. There's other energies in the environment. There are the devas, the gods who are controlling many forces in the environment. There are so many laws of, physics. There's the laws of gravity. There's the way that nature's moving, right? We can plant a seed in the ground, but then how that seed sprouts and grows and bears fruit, that's due to so many other processes which are utterly beyond us. We were discussing this the other day, if we plant, say, an apple seed in the ground and it bears fruit, it's natural we'll have this ego. I planted this seed. This fruit belongs to me. And, it's all my effort and my possession, right? But if you really think about it, like if you remove that haze of false ego, you'll realize like we had a tiny, tiny part to play in that whole scenario. Like we're like maybe one part of 1,000. Like that's how much all we did was put a seed in the ground, right? And then, there's the soil. But soil is actually full of bacteria, or even like just composed of bacteria, like it's, then there's the forces of nature which are causing germination. And ultimately there's the Lord's will in the background, right? Then there's the sun, there's the rain, there's the wind, there's the bees which are pollinating. Like what did we actually do? Like we had a very tiny part to play in that, right? So persons who have this clear vision of things, they're naturally humble, right? Because they realize I can't do anything myself, right? So this verse is breaking this down. So the word ahankar, I think everyone is familiar with that word, ahankar. Ahankar is the word that we use to refer to the false ego. What does it actually mean? I do. Ahamkara, right? I do. So that whole ego is very intrinsic to our material identity, right? That conception of us as doers is I, me, and mine, right? This is very central to our entanglement in this world, and perpetuating, and we're perpetuating that entanglement with this conception at the root. So this verse is explaining that. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmarni sarvashaha ahankar vimudatman kartaham iti manyate. All actions in the world are in every respect affected by the modes of material nature which impel the senses. But a man deluded by bodily identification thinks, I alone am accomplishing this work, right? So this is an actual like substance, ahankar. It's a subtle energy. It's a subtle material element, right? It's one of the 8 principal material elements, right? The 5 more physical elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then there's the 3 more subtle of the mind, the intellect, and then the ahankar, the false ego. This ahankar is actually a material element. It's kind of trippy to think like that. It's an ingredient of this world, right? So, but because it's so subtle, it's so fine, we can't see it, we can't touch it, and it's because it's so intrinsic to our conception of self at present. It's very hard to put your finger on it. you know sometimes we think of ego as like this like pride or arrogance, but it's more complex than that. There can be an expression of egoistic humility, right? They're just 2 sides of the same coin, right? I'm arrogant because I'm beautiful, or I'm humble because I'm ugly, you know and so on, intelligent, stupid, all of these dual things. um they're just, one may look like arrogance, one may look like humility, but it's all ego because it's all tied up with this false sense of self. So ego just means identity, right? It's not, although we may use it in different ways, it just means identity. And there's also a spiritual ego, right? Srila Sridhar Maharaj actually has one interesting phrase in Prapana Jivanamrita: Shuddha Ahankar, pure ego. Right? So there's also a pure expression of ego, of identity, which is that I'm a servant of the Lord. And in that ego, one can tie Krishna up, you know, one can wrestle with Krishna, one can chastise Krishna, right? That ego, that pure spiritual ego, may be expressed in a multitude of different ways, which may look like a type of arrogance, but they're not. They're based on this mood of love and surrender to the Lord. So anyway, going back to the verse here, it's a very helpful verse and an important verse. Helps us to understand. We can start to ourselves. It helps us to understand ourselves. So we like when this conception gets broken down for us, we start to look at ourselves more and kind of see where this is being expressed in our consciousness and our thoughts and our actions, right? That we all have this type of ego to some extent for another, right? That we are of a particular background, whatever it is. We're a particular gender, we're from a particular social class, we're a particular nationality, right? That's part of the ahankar also. And then there's the aspect of the doing, right? That I do this, I did that, and this belongs to me. That's another aspect of the ahankar too. So it's very interesting to start to become aware, right? And then, when you start to see these things, you can also start to feel a bit hopeless, like, oh man, like it goes so deep, like how am I going to be free of this? And then there's this one beautiful verse in Prapana Jivanamrita. I don't remember the origin of it, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj includes it there. And the devotee is saying, the devotee, I see your question, Jayesh, I'll come to that in just a minute. The devotee is saying in this expression, whatever, like whoever I am and whatever conception others may have of me, he says, this whole sense of self I'm offering to you, right? We all have some conception of who we are. Others have some conception of who we are. And ultimately it's, mostly concocted or temporary, right? That person who I think I am, that's a temporary identity. That person that others are speaking about in regards to me, that's also concocted. That doesn't represent who I really am. And that's something that can be disturbing or bewildering, overwhelming at times, right? And so this verse is so beautiful, saying this whole sense of self, my Lord, I'm offering that to you. Let me find it. I have it on I shared it on my Facebook not too long ago, so it's not too difficult to find. Here it is. Gunatita Shuddha Kshetra Gyasyaiva Samarpitato Palabdihi. This is Srila Sridhar Maharaj's illumination, the transcendental pure soul's realization of his capacity to offer himself unto the Lord. And then the verse, it's by Jamunacharya. Vapora dishu yopi kopiva gunato sani yatatata vidaha tadaham tava pada padmayor aham adyaiva maya samarpitaha. However I may be materially designated, however my character may be known, now, O Lord, this whole sense of ego is offered by me unto your holy lotus feet. So nice. However I may be materially designated, right? All this current, self, it's largely a product of our karma, right? It's a covering. We're on a journey of self-discovery. We're discovering who we are, right? It's an adventure. So whoever I may be materially designated, and however my character may be known, right? How others may interpret me, right? And discuss me. This whole sense of ego, I'm offering it unto you, my Lord. It's, surrender is so liberating, actually, because we can sit and analyze and, bang our heads against the wall. We can cry about this, how, we've been materially designated, how others may label us, right? That can be very painful, right? But this is just giving us this beautiful solution. Just surrender that, let it go, whatever it is. I don't know. Whatever others think it is, doesn't matter. My Lord, I'm offering this to you. And ultimately, we're like offering ourselves as balls of clay that the Lord may shape. I'm a lump of clay, my Lord, in your hands. You please shape me. You know who I really am, and you know what I can be. You know what my potential me is. So I'm a lump of clay in your hand. Our Gurudev, he made an expression like that, and he said, and I'm a ball of clay in the hands of my Guru Maharaj, and he can make a monkey or he can make a deity. He said like that. It is in his. I'm surrendering it to him. However he wants to shape me, it is in his hands. So it's so liberating, to be able to do that. Welcome. We had a few devotees join. Maheshwari, Krishna Chaitanya, Rishabhanavi, Sadhvi. Welcome, everyone. Okay, we had a few questions in the chat that came up. Oh, Sadhvi. Yes, Sadhvi, this is Bhagavad-Gītā. We're in chapter 3, Bhagavad-Gītā. And Shreyash is saying, whatever you just mentioned can also be a part of Shuddha Ahankar. Sorry, can you clarify that, Shreyash ji? Can you speak actually? Maybe he's doing some seva. Can you speak, Shreyash? Oh, he's cooking. Okay, yeah. But yeah, pure ego, it can be expressed in different ways, It may, I'll mention one example. It's a point in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, right? Srila Rupa Goswami's book. And because that we in our mat we have a Bengali translation of that, and And persons used to come from other missions to come and buy that from us, and so it's originally Sanskrit, right? And and so it's originally Sanskrit. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he requested, it was one of his godbrothers, the name is escaping me right now, but one pundit, godbrother Srila Sridhar Maharaj, asked him, maybe Ananda, could you close
Mr.
our
Shastri,
screen? Dandavat Ramananda. Sorry, what did you say?
Dandavat Shakurji, Mr. Shastri.
No, it wasn't Dr. Shastri. No, he was a disciple of Srila Saraswati Thakur. Yeah, not Dr. Shastri. But yeah, disciple of Srila Saraswati Thakur. I'm just gonna grab.
Paramananda Prabhu.
No, it wasn't Paramananda Prabhu. It's mentioned in one of our books. I can find it later. But anyhow, this godbrother, he was working on this translation. So I mean, of course, Srila Sridhar Maharaj could do it himself, but his health was not so good in that period. And so he had requested his godbrother to do the translation of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu from Sanskrit to Bengali. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was like overseeing the work, right? And so this devotee was doing the work and then would go to Srila Sridhar Maharaj for consultation on certain points, right? And so then there was one section he came to, which he found quite puzzling. And it was describing this mood of devotion, this mood. And this devotee was saying, I don't care about Baladev. I don't care about
Lakshmi.
oh, was it Lakshmi? It was
Yeah, Lakshmi. I remember that Guru Mai tell.
no, who's the other? Satyabhama. Satyabhama. It mentioned Satyabhama. Perhaps Lakshmi is also mentioned, but in what I heard from Gurudev, he said Satyabhama. So this devotee is saying, like, I don't care for Baladev, I don't care for Satyabhama, but I will do my service. I will do my service. And something like some kind of like strong, aggressive mood, and not showing so much respect, for these, great personalities. And so this devotee was very puzzled about this and came to Srila Sridhar Maharaj saying, how can a devotee speak like this? Balaram is our guru, Satyabhama is Krishna's queen. How can he speak like this? And Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains, this is his mood of service. And it's like this strong, assertive mood, and he's saying, to Baladev, like, I will serve you, Baladev. I cannot allow you to serve me, but I will serve you. I will clean the table. Like, you sit down, I will worship you, and I will do the service, right? And there's this other expression, really nice verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It mentions the qualities, kshantir avyarta, begins like that. It mentions the qualities that will develop within a practitioner as the bud of devotion starts to blossom. And one of the words is so nice. It says boldness to serve, a boldness to serve. So this type of confidence and assertiveness will begin to develop because of this strong identity. I am a servant of the Lord, right? And there's an ego in that, right? It's a spiritual ego, right? We hear Lalita Devi, and our Gurudev, he actually mentioned this verse must be talking about Lalita. This is the mood of Lalita Devi, the principal amongst the Ashta Sakis, right? The 8 principal gopis. She has this type of bold, haughty service mood, even where she can instruct, chastise Radha and Krishna, even because of her intense devotion, right? And her intense service mood. So this pure ego, it may be manifested in different ways that look like arrogance, but they're they're not. Okay, sorry, I'm going back to Shreyash's notes here. And welcome, Rukmini. So nice to have you with us today. So Shreya says, you mentioned about material identity, like nationality, our outer forms, etc. Can that be tangible to Shuddha Ahankar? I'm sorry, I still don't understand, Shreyash. I don't understand. If anyone else understands, please let me know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. You'll have to explain it to me.
It's just covering, see, so it's not relevant. Yeah. I read his question, so it seemed like it's material covering. Yeah. Like Srila Rupa Goswami says, we have many identities. So it's part of that, I guess. Superficial identity. Just my 2 cents.
Okay, well, okay, Shreya, we'll get back to it later. Okay, then, should we go back to our text then?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's verse 27, verse 28. However, O mighty armed Arjuna, one who is in knowledge of the division of the modes of material nature and action, knows that the modes are engaging within the modes, and he is detached from them. One who knows that the 3 modes activated by the demigods impel the engagement of the senses with their objects, knows himself to be independent of these elements, therefore he does not consider himself a doer. So one who is, more awake to the soul, they have this clear awareness, right? That all these energies are playing out, right? And, I, the soul, am independent from that, right? The soul is distinct from all of this engagement and activity. So there's a as I said earlier, right, there's a humility that naturally comes from that, right? So we can go down to the next verse. Persons bewildered by the modes of nature are absorbed in the functions of the modes. Enlightened persons should not agitate such ignorant, unfortunate persons by trying to convince them of higher philosophical truths. Rather, they should advise the conditioned souls to practice selfless action, which liberates them from absorption in the modes. And I think we discussed this last week. Can go forward. I'm feeling like maybe we need to chant the Sanskrit too. I wasn't doing it this time just because it kind of adds to the time of we have less time to go through the discussion, but it is very good to actually chant the Sanskrit. Shreya, it would be nice if you could lead us, because I know you're like a born Sanskritian, but maybe another day when you're not in the kitchen. Oh, I think he's dropped out now. Okay, then let's just chant together, because there's so much potency, in just, we're hearing from Srila Govindamars, that is so potent, but then also repeating that, like Shravan, Kirtan, and chanting that is also very potent. So let's chant together. Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasyad yatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatadvaraha. Surrender all your activities to me with this understanding. All my actions are under the control of the indwelling Lord. In such consciousness, free from possessiveness and anguish, take recourse to battle as your natural duty. Ye me matam midam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shadavanto nasuyanto muchyante tepi karmabihi. Faithful, unbegrudging men who always practice my teaching, this yoga of selfless action, are liberated from the bondage of action, even though they engage in action. So yeah, so that verse, maybe you can go back up. So this verse, this is one of the central concepts of karma yoga, right? That although one is engaged and active in the world, they're not incurring karma, right? Because internally they have adjusted their intention, right? So they're not projecting their own individualistic intention upon the environment. They're acting selflessly according to duty, right? So they're not incurring karma. There's one, Srila Maharaj has this wonderful way of explaining things, right? In a way that just brings them home in a very relatable way. And so one place he explains karma as self-assertion upon the environment, right? Self-assertion. When we assert our own ego upon the environment, which is something artificial in the sense that it's not in harmony with the universal flow. It's not in harmony with the environment. It's not in harmony with the Lord's will. So it's something artificial in that sense. And it's also coming from an artificial aspect of ourselves, a superficial layer of ourselves, right? So that's like an artificial projection, imposition upon the environment. It's a discordant expression. So there's a reaction to that, right? That is karma, right? So entering this state of selflessness, right? And simply adhering to duty, that clears us, that frees us from the entanglement of reaction to our actions. Okay, verse 32. Ye tvitad abhyasuyanto nanutishtanti me matam sarvagyana vimudam stan vidinashtana chetasaha. But the arrogant who resent my teaching are bereft of all knowledge. Know them to be lost in ignorance. Sadrisham chestate swasya prakrite jnanavannapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. For even a knowledgeable person tends to act according to their nature, mundane inclinations. The living beings' endeavors are dictated by their natures. What then can repression accomplish? So this is what is so accommodating about karma yoga, that you're not being asked to, just stop being who you are. You're not being asked to repress your nature, but you're being told, yes, continue to be active, right? It's your nature to be active. You want to engage in different things. You want to have some interaction with the world in different ways. So do that. You don't have to repress that nature, but just change your intention, adjust your inner intention. That is all. Right. So it's a very accommodating approach towards the environment. And then bhakti yoga is developing onto that, right? Where we're not just adjusting that spirit of selfishness, where we're not just removing our selfish intention, but we're also consciously offering. We're trying to enter into that spirit of consciously offering everything to Krishna. So that spirit of bhakti yoga, it's naturally building upon karma yoga. And yeah, so repression, and this is repression doesn't get us anywhere. That's not the solution. And so, other practices which emphasize more the spirit of renunciation, right? They have limited results. They'll get you so far for some time, right? But ultimately you're going to be back at square one because it's an artificial repression. Until, it's natural for us to have desires, right? That's intrinsic to who and what we are as Atma, as souls. So we can't get away from that. It's natural for us to have desires and attachment, but it's simply that it has to be directed to the proper recipient, has to be redirected, right, to the lotus feet of Krishna. Then in a wholesome and happy way, and harmonious way and progressive way, all of our tendencies can be accommodated, right, and expressed. So this is so harmonizing. It is the only solution, really. Okay, we'll go on to verse 34. Indriyasyate ragadvesho vyavastito tayo navashamagachetto yasya paripantino. Although the senses are attracted to and repelled by the sense objects, one must not be controlled by these urges, for they are the greatest enemy of the candidate for self-realization. So a warning, we're being given a warning here. Be careful, these things are going to jump up and attack you. These senses of ours, these wild senses of ours. And we were going through Upadeshamrita again here in our evening classes. And so that first verse, right, is discussing these 6 urges, right? Vacho vegam, manasa krodha vegam, jiva vegam, udaropasta vegam. The urge of speech, the urge of the mind, of anger, urge of the belly, the genitals, urge of the tongue. Right? These are the 6 principal urges that every conditioned soul has to deal with. And they can get us into so much trouble. And the problem is, like, they can just kind of jump up out of nowhere. Or that's what an urge is, right? It'll just jump up out of nowhere. It may be like a very fleeting thing, but in that fleeting moment, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. So this warning is given, right? Your senses, be aware of this. Be cautious about this. Your senses are going to be pulled here and there, but be careful. They are the greatest enemy of the candidate for self-realization. And we can also add here, that fortunately, they're not the greatest enemy of the candidate for being a bhakta. Because if that were the case, we'd be in big trouble, right? What I'm trying to say is, we won't be disqualified from the practice of devotion, right? Maybe from becoming self-realized, you're going to be screwed for a little while. But for becoming a devotee of Krishna, that's another category, right? Because there we're approaching a plane of mercy. And because being sense-controlled or not being sense-controlled is not ultimately meaningful in Krishna's book, right? Krishna looks for devotion, right? Bhava grahi janardana. So, that is something to remember, right, as we go through Bhagavad-GÍTÁ, that there are different lessons for persons in different categories at different stages of development. So this verse is kind of more in the line of jnana yoga, right? Someone who's focused on self-realization, soul realization, and all of these things, purification of the self. And of course, that is something that we also address in Bhakti Yoga, and it gives a good foundation to Bhakti Yoga, but it's not the final goal, right? It's something else. And in Bhakti Yoga, the goal is devotion and mercy of the Lord, right? So that is something to keep in mind, right? That like this is a verse, we keep this in mind, we try and follow these instructions, advices as much as possible. But we also know that ultimately that's not our goal. Our goal is something else. Our goal is something much, much higher, and that is devotion to the Lord. And the principle in Bhakti Yoga is also that through the development of bhakti, this sense control will automatically be achieved as a side effect, right? So that's also something very encouraging to remember, that by the grace of the Lord, as the sun, the Krishna sun, right? Srila Sridhar Maharaj says that so beautifully. As the Krishna sun arises within the heart, all the darkness will withdraw, right? So our focus is more on that, right? So we can keep that in mind, as we go through these verses, and that is very hopeful for us. Okay, we can go to verse 5. Sorry, 35. Shreyanta dharma viguna paradharma tanushtitat swadharme nidanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Even if it is imperfect, it is better to do one's duty according to one's own nature than to do another's well. Even death in the discharge of one's own duty is better, for to perform another's is dangerous. Quite a strong statement, right? And in one place, Srila Sridhar Maharaj expresses this as, mind your own business. We all know that expression, mind your own business, right? We all have, we all are on our own individual journey, right? There's a collective aspect to what we're doing, but there's also an individual aspect, and we're all at different stages on the journey. We're all learning different lessons on the journey, and so we have to be attentive to that, right? Because if we lose sight of what we're doing, we forget our own narrative, right? In a sense, if we forget our own narrative, we get caught up in other people's narratives, we're not going to make progress on our own path. We could go and do someone else's duty very well, but how does that actually help us where we are? If we're at a particular point here, and we need to go forward in order to progress, but going forward for us may look different to what going forward is for somebody else, right? And we'll also lose energy if we're getting caught up in everyone else's business. Then we're going to lose energy. We lose our focus, we lose energy for actually making advancement on our own path, right? So that is something to be aware of, right? And so we should try to identify, right, who are, in persons who we're associating with, who's like a little bit ahead of me, or who's really ahead of me, who's a little bit behind me. And we can associate with everyone, right? But there may be subtle differences, with how we interact with everyone. And then we also need to keep focus on what is our own path, our own duty, our own lesson, right? That is very important. This human birth is so precious, it is so rare, and we want to try to take advantage of every moment that we have. So let's read the commentary here. The eternal, super excellent, natural function, dharma of the soul is pure devotion to Adhokshaja, the transcendental Lord. Therefore, even if this function is somewhat imperfectly attempted by one with external malpractices, such an attempt will be superior to the good practices within the material modes of nature and worldly chain of actions and habits foreign to the soul's nature. Even if death occurs during the cultivation of such pure devotion, in proper saintly association. It is the bestower of the ultimate good. But in the name of good practices, to ignorantly follow another's path, anything other than devotion to the Lord, Dvitiya binivesh is bhayavaha, endangering to the spiritual progress of the soul. So this commentary is kind of like taking this very broad view on this verse, saying, this verse, it can be read in different ways, right? So there's the kind of more individual, personal application, but then there's also this broad view that our duty is to serve Krishna, to love Krishna. Our duty is Krishna bhakti. And so anything other than that, will be dangerous for us. And so we must remember what is our primary duty. And now this is a well-known verse from ЩРީМAD Bhagavatam, which has been discussed extensively by our gurus. It's a very nice verse. It's kind of like, you could say that it's giving Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, all in one verse, like awareness of what is our current condition, what should we do about it, and what the goal is, right? Bhayam dvitiya biniveshata syat ishada pitasya viparya yosmriti tanmayayato buddhabhajetam bhaktyayika yesham guru deva tatma. A person of fine intelligence will serve with single-minded devotion his Lord, who is his teacher and dearmost friend. But those who have turned away from the Lord adopt the illusory ego of considering the perishable body to be the self, forgetting their true identities. Their consciousness absorbed in secondary pursuits, i.e., mundane objectives. They are always fearful on account of the body and its attachments. I'm not sure I'm totally happy with that translation. I might just restructure it a bit. But Bhayam Dvitiya Binaveshadasa, it's a very profound verse, just that first line, there's so much there. Srila Sridhar Maharaj has spoken extensively just on that first line. It's very interesting. It's saying Bhayam Dvitiya Biniveshata Syat. So Bhayam is referring to fear, right? This yat means like arises. So fear arises. What's the origin of fear? And some of you have probably come across on the internet, on YouTube, there are some different presentations of this talk and this explanation from Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I think there may be one called The Origin of Fear or something like that. So what is the origin of bhai, fear? Dvitiya binivesh. Dvitiya means two, right? Dvitiya means
interest. Second.
Exactly. Second interest. Actually, there's only one ek interest, that is Krishna's interest. So fear arises from perceiving a secondary interest. This abhinivesh means like absorption. So to be absorbed in a secondary view interest, right? This is where fear comes from. And one way Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains this is lack of guardian consciousness. Very beautiful, a lack of guardian consciousness, because you're disconnected from the whole, right? You're disconnected from the real current of reality, right? You're living in resistance to that, in opposition to that, and so fear. Think of like a criminal on the run, right? Like someone who's stolen some money or something. They know they've done something wrong. They don't want to turn themselves in and honestly face up to what they did. They want to run away from that, but they're always going to be living in fear. There's going to be some guilt on them, right? Like, we all will experience sometimes we do something wrong, maybe something big or small, and we feel some guilt about it, Oh, I stole the cookie from the cookie jar. Or whatever it is, you know. There's some guilt and some fear. You're gonna get caught, right? Because you've done something that you know you shouldn't have done, right? And so this is the same idea here, that you've turned away from the Lord's interest, which is the real interest of us all. The Lord's interest is synonymous with our interest, right? So we've turned away from that. And naturally, we're looking over our shoulders. There's some fear in the background, right? We have this kind of like collective chip on our shoulder, that, we want to be at the center. And we're always under threat of that reality being opposed, which it is constantly being opposed because we're not at the center. That's just the fact, right? But our ego believes that we're at the center of the universe. We live in our own universes. We're all ruling as monarchs in our own kingdoms, right? And so, but the environment's not agreeing with that, right? Because it's not the fact. And so we're always kind of under this threat that our truth will be rudely, exposed. That persons or situations, they're coming and disagreeing with our version of reality. So there's this anxiety there, right? Like, that everyone's against us, or, I'm not being acknowledged as the best, or whatever it is, right? So there's this fear, this anxiety that arises out of living outside of the Lord's interest, right? When we're living in harmony with the Lord's interest, then everything is beautiful, right? Sarva Sukha Mayadisha is mentioned in Bhagavatam. One will see joy in all directions, right? When one sees me, when one is satisfied with me, they will see joy in all directions because they're recognizing what is the actual center, right? And they'll see that every wave is actually adjusting us, helping to bring us to that consciousness that the Lord is at the center. So, bhayam dvitya biniveshata syad, right? When we're living in this secondary interest, right? Then there's some fear. We will be in fear. And then ishad apitasya viparya yoshmiti, right? This person has isha. Isha is the Lord, Krishna. We have forgotten him. And this viparya yoshmiti, this is a very nice line. It means something like, I think here it's just rendered as illusory ego, but I think it means more something like opposite consciousness. We see things just the opposite than what they really are. In Swami Maharaj Prabhupada's translation of this verse, he uses this expression, topsy-turvy, right? Topsy-turvy consciousness, inside out, upside down. This body we think is us, right? But it's just the opposite. This is actually millions of miles away from the true self, right? We are the soul. We are Atma. So we're in this like opposite consciousness. Our Gurudev pointed out, it's very interesting, how the images enter our eyes upside down, right? Give some clue. And then the brain has to correct it so we see the right way up. We see these clues, right, in the environment. So this viparya yosmiti. So then, someone who is in such a situation, they will take shelter. They will take shelter of the Lord, of Shri Guru, with devotion and serve with devotion. This one-pointed, single-minded devotion. That's a good translation. Bhakti-aika yesham, the single-minded devotion, one-pointed devotion they will serve. So It's a nice verse. And is that the end of that commentary? Okay, then maybe that's a good place to stop for today. Does anyone want to add anything before we close for today? So nice, so purifying and uplifting.
Thank you so much, Vishaka Didi. You explained very nicely. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Ramananda Prabhu, for
Yeah.
being with us, and sharing your
Yeah.
inspiration.
I listen to Guru Maharaj, but I don't get everything. I love how Param Guru Maharaj explained, Gurudev explained. But I like more Guru Maharaj. I don't know. It's more sweeter and more broad. Yeah, I was listening the other day. Actually, Srila Prabhupada says we are unfolding. Yeah. Yeah, we try to unfold. I like that expression, yeah, Prabhupada. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Prabhu. All right, should we close there then today?
If you
Okay.
have time, you can go on. A few more minutes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it was a good place to stop, and yeah. Today's a very busy day here, and we're traveling actually. Today I'm traveling south. We have some programs in going further south in Tuscadero, it is called. And so we have a Harinam Nagar Sankirtan planned and organized by Nanda Krishna Group. We have planned for the afternoon, and then we have then we'll be driving further, and we'll be there over the weekend. So yeah, it's a little busy, and I'm gonna go check in with Janardhan Marj now, then pack up, and so. But I'm on for tomorrow. We'll have our meeting tomorrow. Good to see you, Robert. Happy you could join. Thank you, Tira, and everyone. Okay, well, should we close there then? Panchakalpatrubhyascha kripa sindhu bhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Gurudeva ki Jai, Jai Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. See you all next time. Krishna Chaitanya, Dandavat. Maheshwari. Haribol.